Hello, I'm State Senator Michael Rodrigues, and we have a very special guest today in the studios here at Fall River Community TV. We have Congressman Joseph Kennedy. Welcome, Congressman. Welcome to Fall River. It's great to have you here.
Senator, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
The amount of time that you spend in Fall River has not gone unnoticed. Many of us, and we heard that this morning from the President of the Chamber of Commerce at a meeting that we just left, that your presence, your availability, your accessibility to not just elected leaders like myself, but to the citizens of Fall River is well appreciated.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Senator. You know, it's really, you set the bar pretty high for any elected official to try to make sure that you're out there listening to and responding to the needs of your constituents. And so it's great for me to be here to discuss some of the issues confronting Fall River, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C. today, but also to just build upon your efforts as you serve the residents of Fall River and the greater Fall River region in the Massachusetts Senate. So grateful for your partnership and support, and look forward to the conversation today.
That's great. I mean, you know, by far the biggest issue we hear in Fall River, as I'm sure you assume, is jobs. Yeah. And what can we do to improve the unemployment rate, to create opportunities for our citizens to be gainfully employed. And you organized this morning and hosted at the Advanced Technology Manufacturing Center a roundtable on manufacturing. I mean, why did you do that, and what were some of your takeaways?
Well, Senator, it's really building off some of, again, your efforts in the Senate, State Senate in Massachusetts, but looking at what the South Coast does well, what Fall River does well historically, and really where our competitive advantage is. You know, if you're a business out there, large or small, you have the flexibility to start up where you want to, whether that's across Massachusetts, whether it's across the United States, and obviously increasingly around the world. And so when my conversations with some of those CEOs, you say, why would we want to be based in Fall River? What's the advantage we get? And the response over and over again is a workforce that quite simply just won't quit, that they will work their way through absolutely any challenges, that they've got actually a highly skilled workforce here, that they've got the know-how, particularly when it comes to manufacturing and advanced manufacturing. And yes, there's some other higher costs that we've got, but we can make up for that with the productivity we get out of the best workforce we can find, again, not just in Massachusetts, but anywhere in the world. And so the idea behind that roundtable today was to try to understand some of the opportunities that, and things we're doing really well here in Massachusetts at the local, state, and federal level, and some of the challenges that those companies have in terms of expanding, growing, hiring new jobs, and innovating. And where can the federal government, state government be supportive of those efforts to, at the very least, not get in the way, and hopefully try to actually spur some of that economic development to get more economic growth here in Fall River.
Yeah. It was very interesting. It was amazing the diversity of manufacturing companies you had at the table. We had, Gladding Hearn Boatyard, who is a internationally known manufacturer of custom-built sea craft, whose largest order they've ever received were for 12 units. And then we had Precise Manufacturing that produced 3 million units per day of what they produce. And the needs we saw a lot of commonality, but a diversity in needs also.
Absolutely. Add into that Joseph Abood and their textile manufacturing, making top flight suits for not just people in Massachusetts, but all over the country and around the world. You've got the textile manufacturing, you've got the most precision manufacturing that you can get in terms of boats that are literally being shipped all over the world, but highly customized items that takes an awful lot of talent and skill to put together that actually, by definition, can't be mass produced because every single order that they get are different, to a company that's making millions and millions of parts a day that go into seals and sensors and all sorts of stuff, to big manufacturers making massive orders to one of the suppliers for Maytag for American Dryer that go into thousands and thousands of dryers every day. So every single one of those manufacturers, on the one hand, I think told a similar story about access to talent and the importance of talent, particularly for entry-level jobs and then those mid-manager jobs. And then also some of the challenges in trying that, again, taking a step back, what we have to do to keep the United States and Massachusetts competitive, everything from immigration reform to tax reform to some education issues. And one of the ones that you brought up, and you've been a real champion on, transportation reform, and making sure that this region in Fall River, in the greater Fall River community, has access to the essential transportation corridors and transportation networks that's going to incentivize those upwardly mobile, middle class, upper middle class families to come here, avail themselves of a great quality of life, and be able to commute into Boston Metro West areas as they need, either for job markets or for ease. And so you've been a real leader on this, and your comments, I think, were very well received.
Right. I think there's nothing that's going to be more transformative to the South Coast than to reconnect via commuter rail to the hub of New England in Boston, greater Boston, to allow for ease of transportation both ways, both for residents here to access jobs and opportunity in Boston, and for employees in Boston, especially the young, upwardly mobile, the 25 to 35 demographic, to be able to access the more affordable housing here in the South Coast. And it was interesting, especially by the gentleman from Tony Sapienza from Abood Manufacturing. The issue that he's focused on is immigration reform. Now, that's a very controversial topic whenever you talk about immigration and trying to reform federal policy. That must be very controversial in Washington as it is here locally. I mean, any thoughts and comments on immigration reform?
We're trying.
Yes.
And one of the challenges with immigration reform, Senator, is something that you know well through your experience and bigger ticket and politicized items in the State House here, but certainly in Washington, D.C., there tends to be more common ground than people actually think. That the challenge is a couple of hot button issues out there that ends up delaying the entire process. And the U.S. Senate has passed out with overwhelming support over a year ago a comprehensive bill to try to address some of the major issues with our immigration laws, everything from temporary and work visas to a backlog and streamlining the visa process, to trying to make sure that we're attracting the type of talent from all over the world that actually wants to come here, stay here, folks that are going to create new companies and invest in new companies, to also making sure that we've got a stable and clear immigration process going forward, and that the folks that are here already have can earn their way to citizenship over a period of time and pay fines, pay penalties, but make sure that there's a clear process for them going forward, because we've got to actually find a way to put everybody on the same playing field. This country has never been about creating two different classes of citizens, and so there's I think some challenges with that. Certainly, down in Washington, D.C., we are continuing to push hard for a comprehensive immigration reform and a solution to those challenges. But we've still got a ways to go, and it does come back to being an issue about American competitiveness. We have to find a way to move forward on this, as we've said, from not just a humanitarian issue for folks that are here, but for some employers who are saying, look, we need access to this talent, and the only way we're going to do it is if we have reform to the system.
Do you see the prospects of passing something soon? It seems as though, Washington is really bogged down in partisan rhetoric and politics, and it's we hear about it all the time. We see it all the time. And somebody like yourself that reaches across the aisle in the Kennedy tradition, whether it's your manufacturing bill that's bipartisan support or this immigration reform, do you think that you have enough of your colleagues that are like mind yourself willing to work across party lines to get things done?
So I think there is. The challenge at this point, Senator, is not the number of votes in the House of Representatives, because I am convinced if that immigration reform bill actually went to the House floor, it would pass. We've got close to 200 Democrats already signed on the bill. We've got a couple of Republicans that are already backing the bill. So we're close to that threshold already. And I think that if it ever came to the floor, you'd actually see 218 votes come together to make it pass. The issue then isn't so much the support for the bill, it's trying to navigate it through the process to get it to the floor. And that's really where, unfortunately, a group of Republicans have basically put the brakes on that process, and we're not able to bring the bill to the floor yet. It would be a shame, after all of the work that was put through the Senate, this process, bipartisan bill that was drafted by 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and this gang of 8, as they were called, that came together, worked out at some very difficult compromises, but one that all 8 of these members from across the political spectrum, across the United States, came together on a bill. And then when it went through the amendment process and through the Senate floor, actually came even more centrist.
Right.
That it passed the Senate overwhelmingly with nearly 70 votes. So this was a strong endorsement from the United States Senate and a clarion call to action in the House. And for a variety of very disappointing reasons, we haven't been able to get there yet. But if not now, we will keep working forward. It's something that clearly the American people are saying the time has come, and you don't even need to hear that from various interest groups or pundits on television. You hear it right here at home at some of the premier manufacturers that we're trying to incentivize and support.
Right. Now, we're entering midterm elections for Congress, and the primary is September 9th, and the general elections are the 4th of November. Do you think shortly thereafter some of these big issues would be taken up, or is it going to take time?
I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
The president has kind of held back on advocating so strongly, or as strongly as he could have, for immigration reform, as loudly as he could have, as a way to let that process work through with House Republicans. Now, with the recent indications that they're not going to take a bill up before the end of the year, I think you're seeing more and more Democrats say, hey, this is something that the country really wants, the country needs, and the country's asking for. We go back into session next week for about 3 weeks, and then many of us are going to be back campaigning through much of October. There is a chance after the elections that something gets done, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that we might be able to, that window starts to narrow fairly quickly if we don't see some action on it going forward. So we have to continue to keep the pressure up and to keep the debate up to make sure that people understand that this is an issue that is still important to Americans across the country. Again, not even just big employers, not just pundits and not just immigration advocates, but for businesses right next door that are saying, we would hire if we have access to talent, we would hire if we had, there's various folks here that we want to make sure that we can extend their stay in this country. There's a lot of good reasons for it, and we need to continue to make that case.
Right. And of course, recently here in Massachusetts with Governor Patrick announcing and offering Massachusetts as a home for some of the children that were fleeing Central America. The issue was front and center, and I viewed that more as a humanitarian issue, less as an immigration issue. And I know you visited Central America recently. Did you get to see for yourself firsthand what they're fleeing, what these?
Yes, we did, Senator. I was there over the last weekend, over the Labor Day weekend, bipartisan trip, 4 Republicans, 3 Democrats, from, again, across the country that were able to go down. Most of these children that you alluded to are coming from 3 countries, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And every single one of those countries there's some similarities, there's some big differences as to why they flee and why they're coming to the United States. But I think the most important aspect of it that you have to remember, and that was so clear to us as we went down there, is that the decision to leave your country, to leave your community, to leave your family, to send your children, young children, by themselves, thousands of miles through some of the most dangerous territory on this planet, through areas that are controlled by gangs, through drug cartels, international cartels. That is a gut-wrenching decision that many of us could never hope to imagine. Yet that is the reality that many of these families are confronting and facing every day. And to try to put yourself in their shoes and to understand the reasons why they're going. That was the main reason why the 7 of us went down again to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And you saw extreme poverty. We saw extraordinary violence, essentially impunity. The murder rate in the United States is about 4.8 per every 100,000. The murder rate in San Pedro Sula in Honduras is 190 per 100,000. Wow. 90% of all of the murders in Honduras go unprosecuted, not just acquitted, but there's no capacity. There's very little faith in the police force there. And similarly in El Salvador, such that there's very little consequence for people that are committing horrendous acts of violence. And it creates a insecurity and instability that forces many families to say there's a better future and safety for my family, myself, in the United States than here. And there was a woman senator in my office about a week or so ago who told her story and that of her son to me about their decision to try to come to the United States. A couple of years ago, when they were at home, gangs came in, put guns to the heads of every member of their family. One of them ended up fleeing at that point. The rest of them stayed. She was a street vendor, didn't make much money, didn't have any other place to go. Period of time later, as she was in a car driving home, the car was shot up by a gang. 13 bullets in the side of the car. The driver of that car was hit. He luckily survived. The family was still there, living in the community. She then got a note one day when she got home from trying to sell some goods that said, from one of the gangs, "You have to pay a war tax, and if you don't, your youngest son will pay it for you." It was at that point that she decided that there was, again, no hope and no safety for her son. There was no state body that could ensure the safety of her son, and she took her youngest son with her and fled to the United States and is now seeking asylum here. That is the reality that these families are confronting, and we have to understand that building a bigger fence or putting more border guards on our border isn't going to solve that problem. There are some things we can do through trying to increase economic opportunity in these host countries by supporting the police infrastructure and police apparatus, the justice departments in these countries, to try to build up some more capacity so that they can actually provide some safety and security for those families. We can do some things like make just the process a lot more effective, immigration process a lot more effective. So there's only about a little over 60 judges that are hearing all of these thousands of cases of folks that are coming across the border. We can increase the number of those judges so that those cases are heard much more quickly and much more effectively. But the other thing that I think really ends up driving this issue is two of them, or two big issues. One, misinformation around immigration laws here, and person after person, government after government pointed to the uncertainty around comprehensive immigration reform and the need to actually get that reform done.
What are the rules?
One, it's just what are the rules, and to be clear about those rules, because the traffickers, the coyotes as they're called, are deliberately misinterpreting those rules to families, saying, hey, if you come, you can stay. And that's not the case. Right. The other aspect of it, though, that I think is important for all of us to remember is that again, the lack of safety and security in these countries is extraordinary in driving much of the migration. That is largely due to, not wholly, but largely due to the influence of cartels and gangs involved in the drug trade, and the drug trade that is largely consumed in the United States. So cocaine, certainly in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and then cocaine and heroin in Mexico. Yep. Unless you start to be able to solve that problem here in the United States, which in my opinion, we've tried, yes, there's a law enforcement aspect of it, but you're not going to arrest your way out of this problem. And that means drug treatment, that means looking at the demand for drugs and trying to get in front of prevention and increasing our treatment and treatment facilities and reducing the demand in the United States. That's going to be the long-term solution to actually getting not just a much safer and stable United States, but a much safer and stable Latin America as well.
Right, and we can go on about the opioid issue here, but let's stick with the immigration issue first, and especially those children, because the question I have is, where are they, they chose not to move, so where are these tens of thousands of children? Where are they now? And what is the process? What process are they going through? You mentioned judges, federal judges that are actually reviewing
immigration judges. Yes. Yes. And so there are the federal government decided not to house any more of them in the in Massachusetts. Some of these, as they're called, the children that are coming across the border in Massachusetts. They are at other facilities across the country. The process essentially is that if there's an unaccompanied minor that shows up at the border, and this is what many people don't quite understand, Senator, is that most folks think that when these children are crossing the border, they're crossing under the cover of night through a desert, through a tunnel over with a ladder. Yep. These children are showing up at the border looking out for, seeking a Border Patrol official and saying, "Here I am, help me."
Yeah.
They're not trying to hide as they come across the border. They're trying to be found. And so
Right.
that's again where the discussion of building a higher fence or putting more officials on the border, that's not going to solve this issue. They are in fact seeking asylum and seeking to get into to become part of our system. So what they're then unaccompanied children are turned from Customs and Border Patrol over to the Health and Human Services because they are minors that are in need of care. And then they go through a process, a judicial process to try to understand if they're claiming asylum. There's a process that they have to go through. If they're not, there's a process that they have to go through that way. And that's again where we can try to make sure that every single one of these children do have rights, that those rights are not eroded, but that we can try to make sure that the system works a bit more effectively and efficiently such that they are availed of their rights. There's very few of them are at this point getting legal counsel. Once they are shown that to have legal counsel, the system can actually work a lot more effectively with them. So there's a number of things that we can do to just make that process work better. There's some bureaucratic backlogs with the system, whereby there has to be coordination as we go through. It's adults, whoever are getting deported. There's a coordination that has to be done between the United States and those host governments. There's a bureaucratic backlog there. We can do some things to increase that communication, just to make sure that, again, that process works better without eroding people's rights and liberties along the way. However, and I want to make sure that this is very, very clear to everybody, the issue still becomes, if you are sent back home and you are sent back to the very same streets and back to the very same neighborhood with the same impunity of those gangs, with the same proclivity for violence, with the same motives and ineffectiveness of your local police and local government to actually enforce your safety and security, you haven't changed anything. We haven't solved the root cause of this problem. You've essentially just continued to perpetuate that cycle. And that's why the solution is going to have to be, in the long term, building up the safety and stability and security in these host countries and of their host governments. And we can actually do that in a lot more cost-effective way than building up more facilities in the United States. A meal is far cheaper in Honduras than it is in Texas.
Yeah.
The wage rates are far cheaper for a police officer in El Salvador than a Customs and Border Patrol official in San Antonio. So there's some things that we can do and far more effective use of our dollars that can be done by investing in some of these smartly in the host communities in these host countries, along with our partners in government through our agencies, Justice Department, Department of Homeland Security, USAID, our aid agency, United States Agency for International Development, along with host country governments to make those targeted investments, make sure that those investments are done right and done wisely, to make sure that we're solving this in the long term. The last piece I'd say to that, we actually visited what's called an outreach center, essentially the Honduran version of a YMCA, if you would, financed by largely with USAID funding, our aid agency. Small little building. The entire thing was probably a little bit bigger than this room.
This was in Honduras?
This was in Honduras.
Yeah.
They had a small little gym that was very old weights. They had a little center where teens could come together and study or watch TV, a safe haven, a safe place. They had a wall as you walked in along if you came in the door along the left-hand side of the wall, of all of the faces of their peers who had been killed in that very community for no reason, amidst gang wars and gang violence. That is the reality that these teens and these families are facing every single day. And until you get that under control, you're still going to find people that are willing to go to the ends of the earth to find a better life for them and their families, the same way my ancestors did from Ireland all those years ago.
Right.
Government couldn't provide the basic necessities to rear a family. Millions of Irish fled famine to come to the United States.
Right, and when they fled what they faced here, the prejudice, the anti-immigration opinion was very similar as what you're hearing now with these folks from Central America. So these gangs, these cartels, fueled by the drug industry?
You've got it's
Primarily?
the cartels, yes, guns, drugs, cash, embezzlement at the international level.
Right.
Zetas, Sinaloas, Mexican cartels, Colombian cartels, others that are kind of operating at the highest level. You've got a level down from that are they're called MS-13 and 18th Street. Those are gangs that were actually had their roots in Los Angeles in the gang wars that were then exported as we deported those individuals that spent time in our prisons years ago. They came back and with essential impunity in El Salvador and Honduras were able to build up territory such that they control, in some of those countries, up to 30% of the territory in those countries. Those are the ones that are responsible for much of the street violence, and much of their revenue actually comes from extortion. So you want to start up a small business, that's great. You're in my territory, you're going to pay me $300 a week. And if you don't, we're going to make sure you don't start a business because there's no enforcement, no ability to push back against it. That's a main revenue source for these gangs in Honduras and El Salvador and even inside Guatemala.
And they don't have the police force to deal with that?
No.
The ways and means, and the ability?
The ability, the personnel, the confidence in the personnel, because again, these gangs and cartels are able to buy off some of the police. They're able to, I mean, again, Senator, the fact that 90% of the murders in Honduras go unprosecuted, if you're not prosecuting murders, it becomes harder to prosecute robbery, it becomes harder to prosecute extortion, it becomes harder to prosecute human trafficking. Just because if you don't have the capacity to do the worst crimes, you don't have the capacity to do the less serious ones either. And how do you get witnesses that are willing to testify? How do you provide for their safety and security? Where are they going to go to feel safe? So this is a far more complex and far more challenging problem than I think even the group of the 7 of us, again, 4 Republicans, 3 Democrats that went on this trip. We'd all done our homework beforehand. We all got along very, very well. We all went with an open mind. We had very thoughtful and I think strong conversations because we do represent areas across the political spectrum, across the country. None of us were prepared for the level of complexity and the challenge, the nuance to every single aspect of this because again, when push comes to shove, you can talk about murder rates, you can talk about national trends, we can talk about coffee rust that's devastated a crop and droughts that have made it that subsistence farmers aren't able to provide for their own families, all of which is true. The decision that you make as a father to put your 7, 10, 5-year-old son
it's amazing.
On to trust a human trafficker and a smuggler, to trust him to get him to the border so that he hopefully can reunite with some other distant family member. That is a decision that is going to be a very, very personal one and a gut-wrenching one. But the fact remains that they believe that life is better, that risk is better, and that life is better, and there's a better future for that person in the United States than living through that risk every single day in their own host country. Until you solve that problem, we're going to see this cycle perpetuate.
It's frustrating for a lot of Americans that, you know, we want to help as many folks as we can, but really is how do we help them help themselves? How do we go to the governments of Honduras and El Salvador and Honduras, you know, to say, you know, to give them the resources, the ability to police themselves and to take care of themselves.
And it's not strictly a money issue.
Right.
Money's not going to solve this problem, so we have to be very clear about that. Increasing our aid budget isn't going to all of a sudden wave a magic wand and say, okay, problem solved.
Right.
It's capacity, it's endemic violence, it's impunity. It goes back to El Salvador fought a very bloody 13-year civil war. Guatemala fought a 36-year civil war. Honduras has been more stable, but still has challenges from other aspects that we have to that they have to address. And so we've got it's a complex series of challenges, but the basic heart of it is how do you build economic opportunity in those countries? We are right here at home on a different level, yes, but struggling with some of those same issues of how do you build a better pathway for our communities moving forward. And again, that interestingly enough links right back to our manufacturing.
Right back to the manufacturing and the work that we did today. And unfortunately, our time is up. This is, you know, time flies when you're having fun and when you're engaged in great conversation. So, Congressman, I thank you very much for coming to Fall River, to spending time here, to taking the opportunity to address the citizens of Greater Fall River. Thank you very much.
Senator, always a pleasure.
Pleasure's
to work
always
with you.
mine. Thank you very much.